This is the Impunity Observer podcast. I'm Steve Heck, founder and editor-at-large of the Impunity Observer, and we're lucky tonight to have Russel, the Canadian conservative, who has just traveled to the Middle East. Welcome, Russel. Glad to have you here.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate the invite and to be able to discuss the trip a little bit.
Well, great. Why don't we start with you telling us about where you went and why you went and what did you find there?
Well, normally I do podcasting, I do a bit of blogging, and a friend of mine actually recommended me to go to Israel to this group called Exigent in Canada. They reached out to me. I agreed to go. I went with some independent media personalities. And yeah, we went to Israel for a week and we went to some of the kibbutzes. We went up near the Lebanon border. We went to various different museums and we spoke with members of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. And so, yeah, we did multiple kind of trips. And I want to give a big shout out to Kesset Tours because they did a great job touring us around.
Well, that sounds interesting. Did you go down to the south where the attacks were, the Hamas attacks?
Yeah, so we went to two of the kibbutzes in the south where Hamas attacked. We went to Nir Oz and Kafar, and we went around. We saw the destruction, and it was quite brutal. The destruction that we witnessed, houses were completely destroyed, burned out. People were murdered. Uh, People were taken hostage. We could see in the distance the areas where Hamas came from. You know, it's the cities for Gaza and the kibbutzes are quite close together. So, uh, when we talked to Colonel Grisha about how did they get into the kibbutzes, he gave us a briefing just saying how, the Palestinian people, they were farming closer and closer to the fence line, and they were kind of doing this for months and months and doing little things that became just normal routine. So if you saw someone close to the fence line, it was no longer, hey, what are they doing there? It was just, okay, well, that's so and so, and he's just farming the area. And so some of these things became a bit more normalized, and because of that, I think some people believe that things may have gotten a little bit relaxed.
So they set it up for a long time then.
Some of the information that I was told while I was over there is that it seems like this wasn't a spur of the moment thing. This wasn't, an incident that happened and then it spurred rioting or it spurred a call to arms or a call to action, that this had been planned out for quite some time.
Do the people there that you talked with, they think that it was an intelligence failure, that there was no warning?
Some people, yes. I would say this: the most of the people we talk to want the focus to be on getting the hostages back. That is their main message. They're trying, for the most part, I think, to keep politics out of it. They want to keep on message, and that is bring them home now. That's the main messaging. As for talking about intelligence failures and that there's definitely people talking about it, but I think once the operations have ceased and the hostages, whether alive or their bodies, are returned to Israel, I think then we're probably going to see a lot more towards investigations and inquiries. But for right now, the country, from what I can see as an outside observer, just going there for a week, they remain unified around the principle of they want the hostages back.
And are they willing to do anything at all to get them back, or do they understand that there's a trade-off there, that if they just simply give up their sovereignty to get them back, that's going to put them in a worse position? I would imagine they know that.
It all depends again who you talk to. There's the consensus is, from what I could see, is that the operations need to occur in order to find the hostages and to eliminate Hamas operatives. However, It all depends who you talk to. Like I said, we spoke to a couple of the Knesset members. One of them was far more right leaning than the other one was, and they kind of had different ideas on what should take place. And of course, Netanyahu has to take all those into consideration in his cabinet. So it's a fine balance because you don't want politics to get in the way of actually recovering the hostages.
Well, you wouldn't want politics to get in the way of protecting the national security either, I suppose.
I would agree with that. It's no doubt a difficult situation. There's all sorts of pressure from the UN, from different countries internally. It's definitely a hotbed situation. What I would say it though is I think a lot of this could be resolved pretty quickly if Hamas release the hostages.
Oh, sure, but I mean, they keep the hostages for leverage. So Israel hasn't been willing to give them what they wanted. I mean, an unconditional release, you're not going to get it. And if you put too harsh conditions on Israel, you're not going to get it either.
Yeah, like I said, it's a difficult situation. It seems that for Israel itself, they're not playing games with this. They are focused on getting the hostages back, and that has, of course, meant that there's been a high level military operations being conducted because of that into the Gaza Strip, and they're fighting. More than just a one pronged battle, though. It's not just the Gaza Strip. They have the threat from Hezbollah in the north. We actually went to the north. We went to the Alma Research Center. And the day that we went there, there was a rocket attack. Several rockets were launched into Israel from Lebanon by some organization. I believe it was Hezbollah. And like people kind of think that these rockets are intended for certain targets and that, but it seems to me that these rockets are a bit of fire and forget because we went to the research center and then we actually went to where the rocket hit. And so it was a small Arab town, and it killed a 22-year-old Muslim man. And my question to that is, who's held responsible for that?
I mean, who are you asking about? Whether the Israelis, who the Israelis hold responsible for that?
Well, I guess the people in the village there, they're going to want answers. The people that are launching the rockets, they follow they're Muslim, and their rocket killed a Muslim man.
I don't
And
think they
so
care, do you?
when it comes to the propaganda war portion, they'll use incidents that make it look good for them, and they'll ignore incidents that don't meet the narrative that they want, especially the West, to know about.
Let's put it this way. For the mainstream media, and I suppose in Canada it's probably even worse than in the United States, but you take ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, they're never going to tell you the truth. I mean, you get reports, you read reports, and it's very, very hard to know what to exactly believe. But there are plenty of reports that indicate that the Hamas and probably Hezbollah too, but especially Hamas, uh, sacrifices their own people. There are a lot of reports. Have you heard reports that they threaten to shoot Palestinians who try to leave when the Israelis tell them you have to leave because we're coming, and Hamas threatens them, we'll shoot you if you leave. Did you hear that when you were there?
Yeah, so we definitely heard that from one of the briefings we got from Colonel Grisha. We heard it also too, just from talking with a few different people, and we've seen it online. I mean, if you go on to X, formerly known as Twitter, you can see the videos there where Hamas is supposedly torturing Palestinian people, but you don't see that on the Western news, though. You just see, especially in Canada, I would say you see, well, Israel did this and it killed 5 civilians, and not about the efforts to preserve life and the efforts to evacuate civilians and the efforts to even care for civilians that have been wounded as well.
Are people there bothered by the news coverage that the Western media gives?
I don't think that they're surprised about the news media coverage that the West is conducting. It's difficult, to say if they're upset or not. I don't think overall they they trust the media in the West. I don't think that's their go-to. If they need to talk to anyone, they'll talk directly to government. They'll talk to media that's friendly to Israel, media that's neutral, media that's willing to hear their side. And so I think that that tends to be the focus, because even if they were to talk to the media from the West, I don't know if the media from the West is going to listen all that much.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, it depends who you're talking about. I mean, CNN, in my experience, I've noticed them in Cuba, I've noticed them in Gaza, going back many years, not just from October 7th from last year. No, they never give a qualifier. They never say we are not allowed to go wherever we want and talk to whoever we want to. They never say that. And viewers, I don't know about Canada, but the United States, viewers get the impression that it's just like being at home, that the news can go and talk to whoever they want to. And really, CNN should tell them that they can't do that. But that wouldn't meet their agenda. Plus the fact that their hosts would probably say, no, we're not going to let you in here if you're going to tell the truth to people, because what they're really looking for is propaganda. What they want is to tell the American audience and Canadian audience, hey, the Israelis are the bad actors in this thing. And they don't want the truth to get out. Whereas the Israelis, they're happy to have the truth get out, from what I can see.
Yeah, there's this trend right now in Western media, and basically wherever there's live news, you won't find a reporter. It's kind of like a bit of a joke that goes around in Canada, at least. We have pro Hamas demonstrations every day in Canada, and you can rarely find any mainstream media coverage. Instead, we have a group of independent media that are there recording, live streaming, and then what happens is that the mainstream media will then request copies of to purchase or voluntarily produce that independent media to use in their reporting. So this idea of, like, the old school fedora wearing news reporter hitting the mean streets to get the story, that's not really the case that much anymore. Most of the Western media now, they set up in a very sterilized space. Everyone has prearranged talking points. Everything flows extremely orderly. Not questions that are not approved are not asked, or if they are, they're screened out. It's very much a controlled process. The media they'll show up for a feel good story, though. Like if it's like, I don't know, a man saves an orphanage full of kittens or something like that, they'll show up and do a feel good news story about that. But these conflicts, I call them diaspora conflicts, that have spilled into the streets in Canada, for the most part, it received very limited coverage from our legacy media sources.
Do you see a big difference between what you saw there, what you could perceive, and what you've seen in terms of news coverage? Could you feel the difference?
There was definitely a difference. When I went to Israel, I was under the impression that Israel was basically a white ethno state. That was kind of the way that the Western media portrays it as, is that it's a group of white Jews, and they're trying to assert dominance over the Middle East, basically. And when I got there, I realized that's not the case at all. There's a very diverse group of people. We met several of the Druze Muslims living there. We went to the Druze village, and I have to say, they have some of the best food I've ever eaten. That food was absolutely fantastic. And although you definitely know that you're in a Jewish state because the symbols are everywhere, the Druze flew their flag and they participate in their culture and their traditions in their areas. So to make it seem like it's this exclusionary white ethno state, most of the Israelis there that I saw were not white. They were just they were Middle Eastern. And so again, it's these narratives that are portrayed about Israel and just in general about the treatment uh, that they get and what they give to others in the Middle East. That was a big cultural difference.
So it seems that you're saying that the apartheid narrative is false.
I would definitely say the apartheid narrative is false. Like I said, we went through several uh, Arab cities, Arab towns. We went through some areas that were predominantly Christian, and even within the Jewish community, of course, you have different groups as well. You have your Orthodox Jews, and you have your more liberal Jews, and so again, it's not just. I would say it's a hegemonious society in general, but there's still distinct groups within that society. But it doesn't seem to be as big of a power struggle as in Canada, where groups are constantly vying for power here. Now, in 2015, our prime minister declared that Canada is a post national state. And what that means is we don't have any core culture that holds us together, which means that any group that's willing to come in and exert its influence over us, we have nothing to counteract it with. And if they're willing to use force with their culture, well, I guess we're just at the whims of whoever's willing to be the most forceful. And that really, when you go to Israel and you see that, yes, there's diverse community there, but you're still in a Jewish state. And everywhere you go, there's Jewish flags. Everyone's flying a Jewish flag there. Their commercials all have Jewish flags in them. People wear stuff that has Jewish flags on them. We went to the library there. And again, this is during wartime, so there's not that many tourists. And when we went to the library, it was jam packed full of people, and people there on tours to study history and study the history of Israel and to study the different artifacts that were in the museum, like ancient manuscripts and ancient pottery. And there's this very big sense of we're here. This is our land. This is all stuff that's been excavated from our land from before, even the first temple was built. It's very, very culturally focused on the Jewish heritage. Meanwhile, you come to Canada and you go to our libraries, and our libraries are overrun with homeless people doing methamphetamine and overdosing, and the books are in shambles, and people are scared to go there because it's basically a homeless shelter during the day. That's the difference. People, and if they go there, they don't generally go there to study Canadian history. They go there to find, a book on a topic they like, but it's the nationalism focus isn't there. And what I have to say about Israel, and I'm not, and it's Zionism, I guess, but to me, it was the hyper nationalism, not just the Zionism component, but just the hyper nationalism, where everywhere you went, you knew you were in Israel, you were in a country where their laws that they pass are based off of how does this benefit the Jewish people. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be great if Canada had, a law structure that whenever we pass a law, we had to ask how it was going to benefit the Canadian people, or is that incompatible with a Western liberal democracy? Who knows?
Well, it sounds to me like Canada is kind of unhinged. It doesn't know where it's coming from or where it's going. And what you're describing about Israel, I mean, how much of that do you attribute to the fact that they're surrounded by enemies and that they're actually struggling for their existence?
I would attribute a lot of that. When you have an external enemy, it helps increase that protectionism. It helps increase the nationalism, but also given the history in the region, the religious history, I think for the Jewish people, it's just that much more important that they that they make sure that they keep a firm grasp, because there's a lot of history revisionists out there. There's of course religious revisionists. There's, we have disingenuous people that go online and say, well, Jesus Christ was Palestinian. Don't you know that? And I'm like, myself as a Christian, I'm like, well, no, I'm pretty sure he was Jewish. I'm pretty sure he went to the temple, and I'm pretty sure he followed all the customs and traditions of the time. I mean, it's made pretty explicitly clear in the Bible. And to me, when I hear people say these things, I'm like, well, what angle are you trying to get at here? Are you just sowing dissent for the sake of it? Are you that misinformed? What are you trying to do when you say things like this that are just uh blatantly full of junk?
Yeah, not true. But with you mentioned that they're very the Jewish flag and the Jewish star is every place, and so they're extremely aware of their Jewish identity. But it also seems from what you said that they're very tolerant too.
Definitely. Like I said, when you're in Israel, you definitely know that you're in a Jewish country. But tolerance, I would say that they are definitely tolerant of other people and other cultures. Now, before I went on the trip, I'm going to call him a former friend now. I don't think we're ever going to talk ever again. Found out I was going to Israel, and because before I went to Israel, I was very neutral. I hadn't really discussed it because I don't know much about the Middle East. I don't. I mean, I'm Christian. I know the stories from the Bible, but as for Israel, and I had to do a little bit of research too, and research, the history of Israel. And so my friend, he found out that I was going to Israel, and he sent me this video. He's like, "This is what the Jewish people think of Christians," and it was a video of some Jewish people in the old city, and they're spitting on some Christians there. And I responded back to him and said, "So you're going to take a single incident, and that needs to form my opinion of an entire group of people?" I said, "If we're going to look at it like that, what do the Muslims do to the Christians when they don't like them? Because I can pull up some nasty, nasty videos, and we could go back and forth on this. And I'm pretty sure I could find one side in particular that's going to be particularly nasty to Christians. And there's Christians that have done bad stuff to Muslims. So we can't generalize based off of single incidents and say, well, that's just representative of an entire group of people. There are extremists in every religion. There's extremists in every political sect out there. But I would say while I was there, I found it to be very tolerant of different cultures.
Well, that's of course very interesting. And what you just said, I mean, if you believe everything that you read and everything you hear, you're going to be wrong most of the time. So you have to be a little skeptical, and you have to be willing to ask questions and examine. And when you have an opinion, you should leave room to be wrong.
Definitely. And when I went to Israel, I went there as neutral as I could possibly be. I tried to, okay, I'm here to just absorb the information. I'll take in the information, and then based off what I'm told, what I see, I can make my decisions from there. And so I saw over there, I saw people that are hurting right now. They're hurting a lot because of the hostages, because of the massacre that occurred. I saw people that have formulated around bringing the hostages home. There's definitely a lot of talks about the government failures and that sort of thing, but that's not the focus. The focus is bring them home now, because as soon as you start getting into the mud on the other stuff, then you're taking the focus away from the people that are still suffering to this day in underground tunnels. And if they've passed on, their bodies have not been claimed for a proper burial, and the families are still wondering. And so, and then I saw people there that are very resilient. I saw people there that are very specialized. especially in the areas of war, areas of, while we were there, we met a psychologist, and her job is when there are bombs that hit in Israel, she goes to these areas and she provides critical incident stress management. That's her job. And she's made it kind of her life's work now to go when they do have terrorist attacks and incidents, and try to bring the heat level down for people, because of course it's very psychologically damaging to people when those things happen.
Yeah. Well, my observation about what the government policy is regarding Hamas is that they know that they can't eliminate it because it really has support among the Palestinian people. And what they're trying to do is degrade its military capacity to enough of an extent where they can monitor everything that's happening there, and that if somehow they manage to get weapons or whatever to use against Israel, the Israelis will be able to see it, and they're building zones where there's nothing there so that they can see what's going on. There's a buffer, and that what they're going to do is if Hamas becomes active again, then they'll go in and they'll take care of it. And as long as Hamas doesn't do anything to them, that they'll just leave them all alone. Does that make sense? And have you heard anything like that?
So I didn't hear anything while I was there about establishing buffer zones or anything like that. Um, Basically, what I heard is that they're going after the Hamas leadership. They want to keep them off balance. They want to reduce the attacks. They want to find the hostages. One of the colonels that we spoke to was talking about the role that Egypt plays in the entire equation, about the smuggling that occurs of weapons not from Egypt into the Gaza Strip. And it's definitely it's a complicated situation for, and I couldn't sit here right now and give you a straight answer on how it needs to be resolved, or or even if it can be resolved or not. I don't think that it's going to end anytime soon. I think that there's deep rooted misery on both sides, and I don't know if that can be broached. I mean, for years they talked about the two-state solution, and it seemed to me, based off of what I saw and what I read before I went to Israel, uh, that Israel, I mean, they pulled all their settlements out of Gaza, and as a sign of good faith and saying, hey, okay, fine, we're going to get all the settlements out of Gaza. And all that did was spur on more attacks. And as the colonel who briefed us said, you know, when Israel, they celebrate, if Israel draws back, to them, that's a victory. It's not a compromise. It's not a, hey, we're trying to find a solution, we're showing you good faith. It's a victory. They're one step closer to eliminating the Jewish people.
You mentioned when we more or less towards the beginning of our conversation that there were two different opinions in the Knesset that you heard. What were those two? What were the differences?
The one was a much more right-leaning view, talking about how we should approach Gaza, how we should approach Hamas. Was much more right-wing view, talking about there's still there the Israeli people, and that have still have claim to certain areas, whereas the other Knesset member that we spoke with was a lot more putting pressure on Netanyahu's cabinet in regards to UNRWA and the aid organizations, and the and how these aid organizations have been infiltrated by extremists and the consequences of that.
Well, that sounds like there's not much difference there. I would think that the one who you said was described first would agree with that. No?
I would say the one that I talked about first would be even more to the more to the right of that type of positioning.
Well, what are the people in Israel that, at least the ones that you talk to, what's your impression what do they think of the UN?
The ones that I spoke to, they had a lot of concerns that there was infiltration into these aid organizations by extremists, by terrorists, and that they're using these aid organizations to basically ship things to Hamas, or they're not protecting what's supposed to go with the Palestinian people well enough. And so it's being intercepted by Hamas. That seemed to be kind of the main one in regards to when I talk to people about, you know, UNRWA. A lot of people are very disappointed in the International Committee of the Red Cross too. I think I heard more than one person talk about the ICRC not going in there to verify that the hostages are alive or not, making tiebacks to the concentration camps, and not reporting properly on what was going on in the concentration camps, and I get the ICRC has a very fine line they have to walk in regards to neutrality. But from what I understand, from what I spoke to about people, when I spoke to people there, they did not have a very high opinion of the ICRC, and didn't believe that they were doing enough to meet their obligations under ensuring like detainees and that like they have entire rules and laws about treatment of people in detention and things like that. And they go in quite often to pretty hostile war zones to verify that people are getting their basic needs met. And they're saying that that's not happening here.
How long ago did you leave there?
About a month ago now.
Okay, so you were there before the U.S. election.
Yes, just before. So I got back, and a few days later, they had the U.S. election.
Did you sense any preference among Israelis between the candidates in the United States?
We didn't talk much about the U.S. election. Again, being Canadian media, I mean, there was talk about, who's going to win, Trump or Kamala, that sort of thing. But I didn't really get into it with anyone about who would be better for Israel or what people's choices would be if they had a chance to vote in a U.S. election.
Okay, so it sounds to me like what you're describing is that the differences in Israel are basically not very big. In general, the people there understand that their existence is threatened, so that they have to be together, but they have different opinions on different things, and they work that out among themselves, and they're tolerant of other people, and they just basically want to survive. Would that be a good summary?
I think that would be in general a pretty good summary. I mean the government, and I don't know the details of their government very well, but having looked, gotten a brief view of their government, we did a tour of the Israeli Parliament. We did a tour of the Knesset, which I do want to say the Knesset members have a high level of accountability to the people there, based on what I saw. Their attendance records are very public, and the things they do are very public there. So there's a high level of accountability. Now, what I will say is that in general, it appears to me, and again, it's just my opinion, that Israeli Knesset is not very right wing. It's a right wing government, but within that right wing government, there's different right wing groups, and although there's a core set of values, I think that they can all agree on. Like you said, like there's these individual policies that might push someone further to the right, further to the center.
I see. Well, think that's extremely informative, and it sounds like you had a very interesting trip to Israel. You learned a lot, and how is that being received in Canada? Are you writing about it or talking about it?
Yeah, I've written about it. On my blog, I've written about it. I've done some videos that are on my YouTube channel, on Twitter. I've mostly kept my personal opinions out of it. I believe I Here's the information. I filmed as much as I could while I was over there. Like the camera was almost always on. And so the goal was to take as much information as possible, put it together, present it out to the world. You can watch it, and then you can make the decisions you want to make from there. And so I would say in general, it's been received, I guess. I mean, I don't have a huge following here, but what I have put out there, people have been pretty good about. I had one person email me to tell me that they were going to find me and murder me. But I guess that comes with the territory. When you do anything out in public, you're always going to have interesting personalities out there making interesting threats.
Well, sounds like good journalism to me. and and so, where can our audience find you? And if they want to know more, what can they do?
Yeah, so if you'd like to know more, my website where I do the blogging, I just did a blog post recently on the Rambam Hospital, including a full tour of the underground facility, which you won't see a lot of online. So if you're interested in seeing a good tour of the underground facility, you can go to thecanadianconservative.com. I'm also on Twitter at the Canadian Con, and also on Spotify and Apple and YouTube as well. And yeah, if you go there, you'll be able to find hopefully some stuff that's of interest for you.
Well, that's great. Well, I appreciate that very much, Russell. That's a very interesting discussion and very informative for our audience. And I'm interested in taking a look at those tunnels, so I'll be going to that site and look at it myself.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Steve. I really appreciate it.